What's up, guys? Coming at you from Shenzhen. Yes, you heard that right, from Shenzhen. My little adventure to Hong Kong has ended early. I decided to give up. As many of you know, I spent 7 nights in Macau, and I had planned on staying for 15 days, then heading over to Hong Kong. But I gave up early because things started to really heat up over here in a number of ways. So, first and foremost, Hong Kong is starting to get more cases again, and they announced that there will be new restrictions when entering Hong Kong from overseas, which wouldn't have affected me, but it will affect many other people, and it will go into effect on Friday. What that has done is it's created a mad rush of people who originally fled Hong Kong, thinking they'd be safer overseas, now rushing to come back. Much like the observation I made the last time, the folks who protested to close the mainland border and stop mainland Chinese from coming in have not protested to fix this issue or concern. The Hong Kong government came to this decision in their own time. We are also seeing photos of massive lineups at the Shenzhen-Hong Kong border crossing with people looking to get back into China. This has raised a lot of concerns from locals here in Shenzhen, and the people are calling to have the border closed. Apparently, authorities even caught a few passengers attempting to cross the Shenzhen Bay port with what's at least now confirmed infections. This is the same port that I needed to come back through as well after I would have been done in Hong Kong. So because of the declining state of Hong Kong's infection control, which has a real risk of increasing over the next few days, and my unwillingness to stand in massive lines at Shenzhen Bay Port with people trying to get back in from all over the world, and the risk that the border could be suddenly closed, no matter how remote that possibility may be. But all these things added together influenced me to the point where I gave up on my Hong Kong plan completely. The other reason is really a continuation of this topic I spoke about in the last couple of podcasts, erasing discrimination towards foreigners in China, founded on the concern that the biggest risk now is people bringing this virus back in from outside. Of course, the vast majority of people entering China from overseas will be Chinese nationals themselves, but you can't really visually identify them out in the streets. I'm getting more and more comments about the increasing feeling of discomfort in China from foreigners and have heard personally from a number of friends. One of them needs to travel up to Zhejiang province from Shenzhen, and he has taken it upon himself to stick a sign on his backpack saying that he stayed in Shenzhen, didn't leave China, and that he loves China. This same friend was with his son in his car with his windows rolled down, and when he was stopped at a crosswalk to let people go across, there was a group of Chinese that yelled out, "Be careful, there's a foreigner in that car," and they did this massive circle around the car. Behind his apartment in the local park, one of his close friends was told to F off back to where he came from. My friend that I was speaking of just now is now looking at options to leave China, as he doesn't feel safe, and he feels like this could escalate more, and is pretty concerned about the safety of his own son as well. It's quite an ironic story that some of the foreigners who didn't flee China when it was in the middle of a major medical crisis stood alongside the Chinese to fight this together by following all the rules, downloading all of the necessary apps, staying at home, and more, are now finally being driven away by the reaction from a handful of misguided people instead of the virus itself. Whether it's right or wrong, I can kind of understand why some people will kind of judge foreigners who left the country and are now trying to get back in after they realize China is currently handling this better than their own home countries. They left everyone on their own here to protect themselves, but are now coming back to put everyone else at risk by returning from areas with less of a handle on this situation. I know some personal stories of why people left because of having kids they were concerned about or having a spouse with a compromised immune system. So I empathize with them, and I don't personally judge them, but it would be silly to pretend not to understand where some of the resentment comes from. There's another element that people don't talk about too much, and it's the foreigners who take advantage of China's hospitality. China has always been extremely friendly and welcoming to foreigners. You get a very clear feeling from some of the foreigners here that it gets to their heads and they really do feel superior, and even have the nerve to continually judge and crap on the locals every time they turn their backs. This was part of the reason for the first 5 years in China I didn't have many fellow foreign friends. Now I have a wide group of foreign friends because after a number of years, and particularly after starting on social media, I've connected with so many like-minded people. But in the beginning, I hardly had any non-local friends. I found some of the stuff the community did pretty off-putting, even though I thought it was a matter of a few bad apples spoiling the bunch. But because of this dynamic, I felt equal discomfort when Chinese people would treat me as special. I used to eat at my friend's Hunan restaurant after hours with them and their staff on a regular basis, and they'd always want to cheers with me or give me a little bit more attention. I distinctly remember the first few times when the novelty of having me around wore off and they started treating me like an ordinary local. It felt way better than that special treatment ever did, even though that special treatment still serves as a testament to the hospitality of the people here. The presence of those few bad apples in the expat community may play into a resentment that has built up and is helping to compound the kind of reaction foreigners are getting to these virus fears. And now, for the first time, these few expats can get a little taste of their own medicine. It's unfortunate that a number of people who have never abused the hospitality of locals are caught in the crossfire, though. I have a number of other stories that popped up about foreigners being targeted in China these past couple of days, but we've got to keep in mind there are ignorant people everywhere. And it's just like with the expat example. It's a matter of a few bad apples getting a lot of attention and messing it up for everyone. Recognizing this is also why, when I spoke about racism towards Chinese overseas, I didn't say something like America is a racist country. Instead, I called out the individual behavior or the people who broadcast hateful content, which makes the situation worse. I haven't heard of any physical violence here like I saw towards Chinese overseas, but there is a real risk of some of these altercations turning physical if this keeps moving in this direction. This had me worried about traveling back to Shenzhen as the situation worsens, particularly with my son. I did make it back across, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a moment, but I decided to take a Didi, basically a Chinese Uber, from Zhuhai, where I crossed into, all the way back to Shenzhen instead of taking the boat. It cost over 700 renminbi, which is considered a pretty expensive taxi ride in China. If I were on my own, I probably would have still gone with the boat to save money and to kind of get a feel for the experience firsthand. But my son that I took is the most introverted and self-conscious of all my boys. It's something we've been working on, and it's also part of the reason I decided to take him with me to Macau to have some alone time with him and give him a bit of extra attention. Experiencing awkward situations like this isn't something I ever thought I'd go through too much extra effort on to protect my kids from. I don't want them to grow up in a bubble, but I just don't think it's the right time for him to be treated like a virus when we're making so much headway on his confidence issues. Now, going back to the point about a few bad apples spoiling the bunch, this is also compounded by the fact that people don't usually share normal experiences. They only speak up when something unusual happens, and I'm here to offset that with my incredibly normal experience after crossing the border. Being bothered by taxi drivers asking if you need a ride or restaurants trying to convince you to eat at their establishment can sometimes be an annoying experience near the border crossings here. But today, I've never been happier to be bothered by these people. It really showed that they weren't bothered one bit by me being a foreigner. We ended up eating at a Burger King, something my son wanted, and the staff were as friendly as ever. As a matter of fact, we ate at the same one when leaving Zhuhai, and if anything, they were even more friendly than the last time. Our Didi driver didn't seem fazed by us either, and he even helped us to load the luggage into the trunk. Overall, a pretty normal experience. A level of normal appreciated so much more this time, considering what I worried about encountering. All of the people I heard from being discriminated against so far are white, and I'm not sure if that had anything to do with it, considering the countries where the most concerning government responses, or lack thereof, are ones that might be perceived as white countries, even though, ironically, I'm from North America. I really don't know if that's it or not, or if my experience was better simply because I was dealing with people right next to the border crossings who are more desensitized to foreign visitors. I don't know, but I think it's important to say that I have not experienced this discrimination as of yet. To briefly explain the experience crossing the border, because I had a Canadian passport, I was sent off to a separate area to have my temperature checked with a physical in-ear unit with a disposable tip instead of the wireless ones. My son didn't have to have his temperature checked like this because he was entering as a Hong Konger with what's called a return to mainland permit. A bit odd for sure, but I guess the theory is, statistically speaking, there's a higher chance that someone is coming from overseas if they're entering on an overseas passport. Whether that thought process is flawed or not, that's an entirely different issue. The inspector who took my temperature asked if I had traveled overseas. I told her that I didn't, and she simply responded that they can verify this at the immigration booth down the hall in a "you better be telling the truth" kind of a tone. The Macau and mainland immigration systems are totally different and aren't connected, so it makes me wonder if they have some sort of a temporary or emergency data sharing agreement right now, or if she was just bluffing to make sure I was telling the truth. She gave me a card to take with me which showed my temperature on it, and the immigration booth still asked me a number of questions about my travel history. It didn't take too long, and I got back in without an issue. So now I'm back at home, and I'm not going to be moving across the Hong Kong border anytime soon anymore. And I might even be limiting my travel while I'm in China if tensions are still rising. We'll have to see how things play out over the next few days, but I do want to add another great positive here to balance things out. The Shenzhen government has actually recognized very early on the rising tensions towards foreigners, and they released a guide to remind people to be just as respectful as they would to anybody else, not to cause conflict with foreigners, to respect their privacy, to think in their shoes. And they even took it a bit further, talking about respecting their religion and belief systems. It's basically an active anti-discrimination effort put forward by the government. It's all in Chinese, but I'll pop it into the description here so that you can see it for yourself. It was very encouraging to see this and to know that we're not just kind of being left to figure this out on our own. But what's equally remarkable is that I don't think there were any foreign governments doing the same thing when Chinese were being targeted on the streets and sometimes even in the media. If anybody knows of something that I haven't seen, please do drop it down into the comments. I will say, as a side note, there was a pretty funny addition into that anti-discrimination guide, and it involved saying not to tell people promises you can't keep. This was really funny to me because I used to make fun of something here in an innocent way. What I learned was that people often say 没问题, which basically means no problem, usually responding to something in order to say, I can get it done. This very often doesn't mean that. And on the day of judgment, oftentimes you'll find out at the last minute, oh, actually, that can't be done. I don't hear this as much as I used to, but it was kind of funny to see this in here and being recognized as a legitimate issue. I really did want to get away from this discrimination topic, but there was just too much that happened to not do another update on it. I had planned on doing another What Came Across My Desk segment and talk about some of the general news or other events I found interesting, but this episode has already gone on a little bit too long. I will leave you, though, with a pretty interesting one that is just far too ironic not to share. Yesterday, I tweeted a screen capture of what seems like a now deleted tweet from the governor of Oklahoma. He posted a picture showing, during the coronavirus pandemic, how to support your local communities. Economy. Yes, economy. It involved going to a packed local diner. In my tweet, I reminded people about how many people reacted to the government holding a private banquet in Wuhan during the early stages of this virus. And here you have a governor, even after that learning opportunity, even after that lesson, promoting the very same type of social gatherings. I just couldn't believe this one. What I have to say right now is a last-minute addition that I've decided to slip into these last parts of my podcast here. After I finished editing this clip, I actually got a call from my friend, the one who I mentioned earlier who has to travel to Zhejiang, and the same guy who had his son in the car when a big group of people did kind of a U-shape around his car to avoid him as much as possible. He actually updated me on his travel experience, and I'm really happy to be able to add in another positive here. Along the way, he had to scan a bunch of QR codes and download various apps everywhere he went. One for the plane, one for the taxis, one for the high-speed trains, one for entering the particular area of Zhejiang where he was going. He cooperated with it all, and everyone was amazingly kind, warm, and welcoming to him, with some of the checkpoint officers even giving him a smile and a thumbs up. He reminded me of the video which he shared with everybody when it came out, with all of his friends. It was the one of the Chinese guy in Europe who blindfolded himself in a crowd with a sign saying, "He is not a virus, he is Chinese," and had people walk up to him and give him a hug. He was incredibly touched by that video and felt a lot of the same feelings on this trip, but this time around, he was the subject of this story. Now, the possible criticisms of such a stunt, the one that we're talking about in Europe, or perceived ironies surrounding it is not lost on me, now that we can look back in retrospect. But that's kind of getting away from the main point here. He also wanted to let me know that although he has legitimate experiences with discrimination these past few days, a lot of other foreigners who are complaining in the group chats and saying they're not allowed into certain areas are in fact just not cooperating or doing what they're supposed to do. He was reminded of this when he thought about how willingly he did everything that he needed to do on this trip today. The Shenzhen government actually has local workers here who speak a little bit of English and make great efforts to try to help these expats and even visit their apartments to try to assist them with all the necessary registrations. And some of these expats deliberately say, "听不懂," which basically means, "I don't understand," because they simply don't want to cooperate. Again, these expats don't represent the majority. However, they do represent the majority of people who get vocal and who get up and complain, because they turn around and complain afterwards when they aren't granted access to certain places or public facilities. You get this actually with a lot of people who appear to complain about China in a very unbalanced manner. Keep that in mind when you do see these people that seem to be a little bit unbalanced with their criticisms. More often than not, these people have designed their own reality and set themselves up for failure, either inadvertently or so that they can continue to complain and blame their own failures on others. Okay, so that's the end of my last minute insert here. I have a bunch of other interesting things to share with you guys, but I'm going to cut this one short here to keep my podcast from running on too long, and I'll fit those other items into the next episodes. So, with that said, guys, stay safe, take all the precautions you should be taking, and I will see you in the next episode. Peace.